Hello and welcome to Atop the Fourth Wall, where bad comics burn. Ted Kord was dead, murdered by a friend gone mad. Maxwell Lord thought of himself as the king, the single most important piece on the board. In reality, however, he was just a pawn in a much larger game. Ted was on the trail of a conspiracy, but he had only uncovered part of it. That Max had taken over the organization Checkmate, and what's more, had taken control of a satellite network set up by Batman. Let me back up. As I stated back in my 15 Things Wrong with Identity Crisis video, it had been revealed that Batman's memory had been wiped by the League to cover up another crime they were committing. When he discovered what they had done, he too had become paranoid about the superhuman population and decided to set up a satellite network to monitor them. Max found out about it and, like with the League, had taken control of it and outfitted it with new advanced technology. But as I said, he and the satellite network, run by an artificial intelligence called Brother Eye, because it's a thing in fiction where we need to give artificial intelligence a familial association. Mother, father, brother, etc. Why does nobody in fiction realize how creepy that is? Couldn't you just call it Steve? Anywho, Brother Eye gained sentience thanks to the real person responsible for these events, as it led into the direct sequel to Crisis on Infinite Earths and the 2005 DC crossover event, Infinite Crisis. There's a lot to go over with Infinite Crisis, so we'll skip it to make things a bit easier. The point is that the one responsible for all of this set about a series of events that affected all corners of the DCU. The villains, the cosmic, the all-too-human, and the magical. Let's talk about the magical part first. The Spectre, a supernatural hero who also happens to be literally God's wrath, got tricked into trying to eliminate magic from the world. And as such, this brought him into conflict with the wizard Shazam, whom you might recall last time taking the Blue Beetle scarab from Ted Kord when he was looking for answers. Spoilers! The wizard who lets a huge granite block flimsily hang over his head and thinks giving superpowers to a 12-year-old is a good idea was not particularly helpful. When Shazam was killed and his domain, the Rock of Eternity, was shattered, the pieces scattered throughout several parts of the Earth. And the Scarab went along for the ride, landing in El Paso, New Mexico, where we'll pick things up in a minute. One of the other things that was part of the build-up to Infinite Crisis was the fate of Maxwell Lord. Long story short, Batman and company found out what happened to Ted and investigated, and Wonder Woman was forced to kill Lord. Now, there is a lot wrong with this. Not necessarily 1D killing him. Much as I dislike heroes killing, I could see her doing it. But if I went into everything that didn't make sense about this, we'd be here all day. It was the creative direction they chose to take the character, one that unfortunately resulted in Amazon's Attack and Countdown, and you all know how much I love those books. But some good things did come out of it, and sadly I needed to mention Maxwell Lord's death so we could cover his resurrection later. DC Comics. If it seems like somebody's dead, just poke him with a fork and wait another 5 minutes. Here is the problem with Infinite Crisis. It wants to pass judgment over the darkening state of comics. It wants to berate uber-violence, darker heroes, edginess, and the fixation on blood and terror and death and disease and war and seriousness. But it revels in those things. It doesn't understand that it's guilty of the very things it hates. Infinite Crisis is that college humor Batman sketch where Batman kills a bunch of people and doesn't realize he did so.
What happened to no guns?
This is a gun?
Now, I actually like Infinite Crisis, despite this and a number of other flaws in its story. I can't begin to tell you how brilliant Kyle Rayner's plan is. Mainly because, like the story that got it going, the same one that killed Ted Kord, it is well written and able to juggle pathos, the sheer scale of everything, and fit in character bits as it needs to. Remember, a story does not have to be 100% perfect to find it enjoyable. It really just comes down to an individual and how much the flaws you do spot affect your ability to enjoy it. The flaws in Infinite Crisis do not make it bad for me. I am still mad about one thing, though. The aftermath of the story seemed to suggest that they were done with this more dour outlook at DC, but history did not play out that way. Although it did do so with our third Blue Beetle. With that out of the way, let's dig into the all-too-brief time we had with Jaime Reyes, the third Blue Beetle.
Welcome to
We first meet Jaime in Infinite Crisis number 3 with friends Paco and Brenda, who would be his closest confidants in his solo series, which we'll be getting into in a bit. With everything going to hell, the Rock of Eternity raining fiery death across half the United States, naturally Jaime's attention is focused on the shiny thing he finds in the dirt. But of course, that's just one plot thread among the myriad occurring in Infinite Crisis, so we pick up this thread in issue 4. After everything that happened with Ted and their failed efforts to stop Maxwell Lord's forces without suffering more casualties, Booster Gold decided enough was enough and returned to the 25th century to get not only new equipment for himself, but also historical data about what happened during these events so he could come back again and help. Which is really a tactic that time travelers should employ more often. Don't know what's happening? Go into the future, read Wikipedia, and then come back again! Unfortunately, time travel is an imprecise science, so he arrived too late to stop a few key events. His next goal required the Scarab, which crawled over to Jaime's bed while he slept and fused itself to his spine. I imagine this will be the ultimate fate of anyone who owns a Furby. In issue 5, Booster takes Jaime to Batman, activating the Scarab for the first time and decking him out in his armor. The reason they went to Batman is because he's going after Brother Eye. According to historical records, though, the main satellite is cloaked and his team never finds it. However, the Scarab can detect it. As such, they pull the bug out of mothballs and fly it into space, because of course Ted equipped it to fly into space. This is a superhero story! And Jaime actually takes this pretty well, all things considered. Sure, he's nervous about the insanity of the situation, but he's not screaming or fighting or anything, which is kind of odd when you consider a man who dresses up in bright gold spandex abducted a teenage boy after a shiny bug attached itself to his spine and is now flying into space alongside a dude who dresses up like a bat, a cyborg, an elemental man, a guy with a big T on his face, Robin Hood, a woman who in another life was an Irish ninja, Ryan Reynolds, and the former host of The Daily Show. I would make a joke, but really, isn't that already the joke? It's not normal, Jaime. It's history, and we're here to make it.
Booster, you have no idea how to talk to kids. You need to call them retarded and then force them to eat rats. Am I the only one here who's been around kids?
The Scarab actually talks to him and displays information for him, allowing him to force Brother Eye out of hiding. Once their job is done, the Scarab forces Jaime to teleport away, ending his involvement in things here. We pick up from there in Jaime's solo series that lasted a rather decent 3 years. After teleporting away during the events of Infinite Crisis, Jaime crashes down on Earth, where he shall now begin his 75-issue quest to destroy the Dire Wraiths on Earth. And instantly upon crashing, he is attacked by Guy Gardner. Yeah, I can't remember if I've covered Guy Gardner before. Basically, he's the asshole Green Lantern. Or, as Jaime's sister will later call him, the crazy one. And this is in the same universe where Hal Jordan did go crazy and kill the entire Green Lantern Corps. But no, Guy is abrasive, in your face, and a near-complete jerk. But he's got his positive moments. See, here's the thing. The reason he's attacking Jaime is because something about the Scarab is making his ring go nuts. The same thing happened when Jaime was next to the other Green Lanterns in Infinite Crisis. Something about the Scarab gets the ring sparking. Fortunately, like I said before, the Scarab can talk to Jaime and thus provide him with defenses and weapons like wings, shields, and energy cannons. The first issue mixes the battle with Guy with flashbacks to just before Jaime found the Scarab, where we get a deeper look at his friends and supporting cast. Brenda, an overachiever skilled in Aikido who had an abusive father, Paco, an underachiever who's got a crush on Brenda and hides it by teasing her constantly, his parents, mechanic father who owns a service station, and a nurse mother, plus his annoying little sister. There's more, but we'll get to them in a bit. Guy eventually beats Jaime, mostly due to his inexperience, and the armor around his face retracts to reveal his age. A kid? It's just a kid? I don't hurt kids! I'm the sane and rational one! That's why I'm talking to a piece of jewelry! Guy apologizes, explaining that there's something about the scarab that made him want to fight and kill him. He also states implicitly that whatever the scarab is, it's not magic. Magic has a different effect on the ring. Guy promises to talk with him again, but still leaves him alone in the middle of the desert. The armor retracts, and the final flashback shows what happened right after the scarab first attached to his spine, but before Booster found him. Namely, that Jaime saw a woman with no eyes. The final stage of Youngblood's disease. I've got to admit, when I first read this back in the day, I did not like it. Aside from the fact that I had grown to learn more about Ted Kord during that time, and thus had become mad about his death, the first issue is fairly unremarkable. The tone that would be so good for the book had not yet been established, the dialogue wasn't as snappy, and it raised a whole bunch of questions without answering them. We were still in the transitional period where multi-issue storylines were becoming the norm instead of standalones, and I was still rather annoyed by it, so I left the book alone and moved on with my life. Fortunately, I got back into it later thanks to internet buzz, but let's continue with the next few issues. First and foremost, Jaime has been gone for a year. Yeah, after Infinite Crisis concluded, it was decided that the best way to create some new buzz for books and shake things up creatively was for all DC titles to jump ahead 1 year later, with the weekly series 52 to tell what occurred in the intermediate time. Jaime explains everything about what happened to his family, even transforming into the Blue Beetle in front of them to prove it. What a shocker! Telling the truth to your loved ones causes them to, run off in fear of you. Huh. Well, there's your lesson, kids. Suppress everything and bottle it all up into the deepest pit of shame you can find. I kid. They're afraid at first, but after some time to settle over it, Jaime takes the opportunity to learn about his powers a bit, then goes off to find Paco and Brenda. Paco, it turns out, has hooked up with the Posse, a gang that Jaime had encountered the previous year in what is admittedly a continuity hiccup, wherein he transforms into the Blue Beetle during his encounter, despite Infinite Crisis number 5 being where he first saw the armor. The Posse was after him because no Eye Lady is actually part of them, not that Paco knows anything about that. Brenda's abusive father died in the intermediate time in a DUI, leaving her in the care of her aunt, who it turns out is a mafia boss named La Dama. Not that Brenda knows this, though. In issue 4, Jaime's back home and doing research on the Blue Beetle stuff, learning about both Ted and Dan, and wondering why, despite Dan having superpowers, his armor didn't look anything like the big bug suit. More on that in a bit, but the good thing about not getting all the answers right away is that it allows all the story stuff to develop more naturally. We also see more development with his relationship to Paco and Brenda, who always relied on Jaime for emotional support, since he was the balance between the two extremes. The Kirk to their Spock and McCoy, as it were. Again with the Star Trek thoughts. Am I forgetting something? Without Jaime, Paco joined up with the Posse, and when the police questioned Brenda about Jaime's disappearance, her father hit her so hard it put her in the hospital. I did mention that this book had a more light-hearted tone, right? The Posse are a group of mostly metahumans who have come together to protect each other. There's no Justice League New Mexico or the like to help defend them from crime and corruption, so they joined up with each other. There are regular people in it like Paco to keep the business side of things going. Nothing drug-related, but some gambling, bodyguarding, all that. It's the side of a superhero world that's not normally explored, and frankly better explored here than in previous efforts. Anyway, No-Eyed Girl got taken by La Dama, and they discover a compound in the desert where her and other metas are kept. Of their own free will. While La Dama wants an army of metas, she's also offering them refuge and the choice to come and go as they please. She kept it hidden mostly because she deals with a lot of magic and sorcery, which can attract unwanted attention. She of course also figured out Jaime was the Blue Beetle and offers a truce to not interfere in her operations or she'll out him. However, their talk also gets Jaime to realize another truth. That she had Brenda's father killed to protect her. Because nothing says true love like murder! La Dama offers her skill in magical research to help him learn more about the Scarab, but then a new player enters to further confirm that the Scarab is not magical in nature. It's alien. And this new player? This is Christopher Smith, aka Mitchell Black, aka Charlton hero the Peacemaker. Back in the Charlton days, he used to run around looking like this.
There. Sure glad I don't look stupid in this.
It's not like he at least had a good concept behind him to justify the goofy-ass look. The idea behind Peacemaker was that he was so dedicated to peace that he would fight for it. Admittedly, the paradoxical adage, if you want peace, you must prepare for war, is a thing that exists. Just that it sounds stupid when you say a guy loves pacifism so much he shoots people over it. To be fair, though, the character's history involved forming an institute that created non-lethal weapons. He also has a military history, and at the time of this book, acted as a mercenary. One of his missions found him traveling to the Chi-F Ray tomb that Dan Garrett had originally discovered the Scarab. Something happened when the Scarab landed on Earth, resulting in most of the Scarab's database being separated from the Scarab itself. Said database got transferred inside of Peacemaker's head. Remembering more about what happened during Infinite Crisis, Jaime recalls that the Scarab shifted him into another dimension to hide him from the Green Lanterns. But since time works differently in that dimension, when he shifted back, a year had passed. However, the Peacemaker brings up a good point about this. The Scarab was built by some alien race. Some alien race big and bad enough to have a beef with the Green Lanterns. To be fair though, that's not exactly a short list, since the Guardians of the Universe have the uncanny ability to piss everybody else off. Wanting more answers, in issue 8, Jaime, Brenda, and the Peacemaker embark on a road trip to find Dan Garrett. Okay, I was joking last time about him having super resurrection powers, and with how inconsistent Dan is every time we encounter him, I bet this time he's gonna be a woman. I was kidding! Actually, this is Danielle Garrett, Dan's granddaughter, and yeah, we never learn who Dan got together with, though like I mentioned 2 episodes ago, I'd like to think it was Lurie. We sadly never also meet Dan's children, but then again, this doesn't really make much sense anyway. Even if we assume that Ted Kord was a student of Dan Garrett, and not just friends in college like all the previous times their relationship was mentioned, the guy didn't look much older than 30, maybe 40 if you wanted to push it. Sure, he could have had children in his 20s who then also had a kid in their 20s, but in universe, Dan Garrett couldn't have died any more than 10 years previously with DC sliding timescales, so who knows how old Danny is. She looks to be in her late teens, early 20s, but then again, this is also comic books where anyone age 8 to 80 could have the same physique. She reveals info about Dan to them, including giving all her notes about the Scarab. Danny becomes a somewhat recurring cast member. She's highly intellectual and analytical, talking a mile a minute about everything she knows, which sadly isn't much. But fortunately, they have a crap ton of notes they can go through. Paco's been busy in the meantime too, setting up 2 more supporting characters, brother and sister Nadia and Hector, to work in the Beetle Cave. Yes, even Jaime must follow in the tradition of ripping off other characters. You wear the name well, kid. Actually, it's more of a virtual database and they can coordinate plans with him. The thing is that people have often compared Jaime to Spider-Man, at least a younger Spider-Man anyway, but honestly, I don't really see it. If he's like Peter Parker, then it's only in how he zigs in every way Peter zags. Jaime trusts his identity to a lot of people, he works to plan for the future, and approaches things with a bit more of a clear head unless something hits him personally, then he's on a rampage. Although that tends to be the case of any superhero, really. Over time, we hear phrases here and there relating to the Scarab, a name really, the Reach, and how the Reach is coming to Earth, which it finally does in issue 12. After encountering a probe from the Reach, which is of course a giant robot shaped like a huge beetle, a negotiator beams down to talk to Jaime. He says the Reach are intergalactic traders. They send out scarabs throughout the universe looking for civilizations to trade with. If a civilization isn't advanced enough to trade, the Scarab waits until their technological level reaches a certain point, then chooses a host to act as their agent. What happened to the Scarab was that it was repeatedly hit with magical energy, which screwed it up. The Scarab has been malfunctioning, and when Dan Garrett removed it from the tomb, which was in fact its charging station, it screwed it up even further. Which basically explains everything we ever needed to know about Dan Garrett and his inconsistencies. Let me explain. Dan's shifting powers and costume appearances? The malfunctioning Scarab has only been able to form parts of the armor and abilities. Admittedly, they don't bring up anything from the Fox Comics days, but you could probably argue that the size changing was actually some kind of holographic illusion. Even the telepathy could actually be some kind of data transmission that the Scarab sends out. The Scarab, without the database that Peacemaker now possesses, was confused about its origins when it sent Dan Garrett off on missions from the gods. Hell, it could have probably taken information from Dan's own archaeological knowledge to try to half-construct the story about it. The Scarab could have had previous hosts we never see, hence the fight with the Eye of Horus. When the Scarab revived Dan Garrett and made him go on a rampage, the Scarab was once again damaged by the explosion in Jarvis's laboratory, going back to basic programming to get a suitable host and selecting Ted, but it couldn't yet seize upon him as a host. It's likely, given what we see later, that the Scarab can self-repair, hence how it could have eventually ended up in a tomb again for Hawkman to find. Yes, that was supposed to be Booster Gold who did that, but as I said last time, that's a bit of a continuity hiccup of how we actually saw the Scarab during that time, with Ted never having claimed it after Dan's death. Although you could possibly argue that maybe the charging station somehow produced a second Scarab with data transmitted from the original one Dan Garrett had, and that Hawkman had conveniently found that one in Kai F. Ray's tomb again, but that seems unlikely. And the reason Dan Garrett's hair color kept changing was because I don't know, he dyed it and eventually settled on something before he died. The Negotiator informs Jaime that they don't know how to remove the Scarab without killing him. He also says that the host of the Scarab is meant to act as a guardian of the planet, to keep humanity from destroying themselves before they can arrive and offer technological aid that can help stop wars, disease, hunger, and traffic accidents. They say they want to greet the authorities properly and promise to help Peacemaker get the database out of his head, since it's screwing with his mind a bit, as an alien database would. But we soon see them privately and discover that while they are indeed business people, they're not exactly on the up and up. The Scarab is what they refer to as an infiltrator, and they do indeed plan to conquer the Earth. However, they're not going to just do a massive invasion, since not only do they worry about how Jaime's Scarab isn't under their control, but also the sheer amount of superhumans on Earth, including Green Lanterns. They want to test Jaime's abilities, which they do by using Scarabs to take over a homeless shelter. Their ability to shift things out of this dimension allows the tech to be hidden from Earth's technology and eyesight, but not from the Scarab, so Jaime and Peacemaker realize what's up. The good news is that the Scarabs are only surface level attached. They'll create armor and weapons, screw with their heads, but aren't fusing to people like they did with Jaime. Sad, really. This could have fulfilled Chuck Dixon's idea about a team of Blue Beetles. What makes Jaime especially different, though, is that he's unwilling to kill. The Scarab keeps offering lethal solutions to their problems, but Jaime resists that, even telling the Scarab how they always have a choice. The idea even seems to spread to the other Scarabs attached to the homeless, but the Reach recalls and destroys them to prevent what happened to Jaime to spread. They then make peaceful contact with the Justice League and then various Earth governments, obeying the established law for extraterrestrial contact. What? Of course they have established law to deal with this. Bad writers of a shared superhero universe forget that stuff happens when we aren't looking at the main characters. And in a world where there are hundreds, if not thousands of superheroes and supervillains, multiple previous alien invasions, and some of those heroes being aliens, you're gonna have laws and systems in place over the course of the decades that this universe has existed to handle this stuff. Or, you know, we could have crappy writers forget all of that and then pretend everyone's stupid and has no long-term memory. Thanks, Civil War, Amazon's Attack, Battle for Bloodhaven, and plenty of other crappy superhero miniseries events. Guy shows up again to talk to Jaime, and given how they previously met, it shouldn't be a surprise that Jaime attacks on sight. Something else to note about things is the creative team. The writers for the book were Keith Giffen and John Rogers. What's weird, though, is that while Giffen is known a lot for some of his comedic work, including last time with the Justice League International stuff, it's only after he leaves and John Rogers is the sole writer that the series actually becomes lighter in tone, with more comedic situations coming from putting the fantastical in a more mundane setting. So after Guy tries to talk to Jaime again, this time in civilian garb, Jaime attacks, but is stopped by his mother yelling at him for attacking someone without provocation, and then berates Guy Gardner too. Is that a giant green fist? Is that a giant green fist? I will not allow you to play with Hulk toys in my house, Mr. Gardner. Guy explains what the deal is with the Lanterns and the Reach. About 40 to 50,000 years ago, the Green Lanterns and the Reach were at war. It ended in a draw, which just goes to show how serious the Reach are as a threat. They arranged a treaty. The Reach were allowed to conduct business and not try to take over any worlds, and the Guardians of the Universe wouldn't fight them. After a battle concerning a Reach facility in the South Pole, Guy offers a gift to Jaime, a book on strategy and tactics. The reason that a lot of people were actually initially hesitant to get into the series was because it felt like accepting Jaime was being disrespectful to Ted Kord's legacy as the Blue Beetle. What we've seen so far, though, is that Jaime's run is all about respecting that legacy. The strategy book was a gift from Ted to Guy, part of a list of other books. Guy admits that Ted Kord's strength was that he didn't have superpowers. He had to outthink his opponents, and Guy speculates that he was probably even smarter than Batman. But then again, that could just be Guy talking crap about Batman because of the whole Batman knocked Guy clean out with one punch thing. However, what may be my favorite issue of this series is issue 16, featuring Jean Loring, Eclipso. You might recall Jean Loring from both my video about Identity Crisis, but also Countdown. Ironic that a genuinely good, awesome comic also happens to have a connection to friggin' Countdown. That series had tendrils that reached everywhere! You've gotta love this issue for the title alone. Total Eclipso the Heart. Anyway, the plot concerns Eclipso trying to kidnap a baby involved with the posse. Long story, unimportant here. But she's stopped by Tracy 13, a teenage sorceress and lesser hero in the DCU. The really funny thing about her is that she's the daughter of Dr. 13, the DC Universe's biggest skeptic. This is a guy who routinely encounters the supernatural and believes it all to be a bunch of fake crap. Anyway, during the fight, Paco saves the baby, but according to the rules of the magic ritual Paco interrupted, he has become the baby's champion against her. She chooses as her champion Jaime, because she's a supervillain and thus unleashes Jaime's deepest, darkest, most ultimate power fantasy, the true monster that lies within Jaime. And that monster is a dentist! Yeah, Jaime's secret fantasy is to be Herbie the Misfit Elf. Specifically, a dentist with a six-figure salary that he can use to pay off his parents' mortgage, his sister's college, and still have a comfortable living. Because Jaime is just that decent a kid. And Paco whacks him with a stick. Eclipso is naturally pissed, but Tracy is able to focus a bunch of holy magic mojo into her staff, revealing why she in particular is here to deal with Eclipso. Because one of the people who helped raise her was Sue Dibney. You know, the lady Jean Loring murdered. And that, my friends, is why I'm opposed to simply retconning bad stories out of continuity. Good writers take something bad and build something good out of it. Tracy becomes Jaime's girlfriend, because what we really needed was yet another supporting cast member, but the following issue is also really damn good. It involves Jaime fighting a supervillain called Typhoon, who can control hurricanes. Jaime uses some of the strategy stuff he learned from Ted's book to not only get safety for a bunch of people, but also to take out Typhoon. However, we're also reminded that he's a good kid, because in victory, he's not triumphant, but sad that he couldn't save more. The next issue has Jaime teaming up with the Teen Titans to help get a rocket launched. One that the Reach has hired bounty hunter Lobo to stop. They succeed, but Robin offers Jaime the chance to do some actual practicing at the tower. We'll be getting to that a bit later.